Lita for embarrassing my SIL after she expected me to pay her and her friend's bill. So I 25F went out for dinner for my sister-in-law's 28F bachelorette party this past weekend. But before I dive into what happened, I need to give you a little backstory to understand how we got here. My husband 26M, Nate, and his sister SIL have had a complicated sibling dynamic their entire lives, mostly because of how their parents treated them growing up. Between my SIL and Nate, it's always been painfully clear who the golden child was in their family. My in-laws have coddled my SIL for as long as anyone can remember. If she even so much as hinted that she wanted something, she got it. No questions asked, no compromises. She was the kind of girl who never heard the word no. If she wanted the latest iPhone, she got it, even if it meant my in-laws had to put off buying something for themselves. If there was a school trip she wanted to go on, it didn't matter how expensive it was, she was going. Meanwhile, Nate was left to fend for himself. Growing up, Nate was more on the nerdy side. He was the kid who loved video games, was always reading science fiction novels, and could spend hours tinkering with his computer. He wasn't unpopular, but he wasn't the social butterfly his sister was, either. Nate got picked on a lot in school because he wasn't into sports, and he didn't care about trying to fit in with the cool kids. And my in-laws, they never made it any easier for him. They would straight up tell him things like, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Or, "Maybe if you were more outgoing, people would like you more." It was as if they were completely oblivious to how damaging those comparisons were. They saw SIL as this perfect, shining example of how a kid should be popular, pretty, always in the spotlight, and Nate was just, well, Nate. He was expected to somehow transform into someone he wasn't, someone more socially acceptable, someone more like his sister. But here's the thing, Nate took all of that and used it as fuel to better himself in his own way. He focused on his studies, and when he wasn't doing that, he was diving deep into coding, learning everything he could about computers. He pushed through all the teasing, all the comments from his own family, and eventually ended up at a top university, which is where we met. We both pursued degrees in tech, and now, years later, we're both working in the industry. We have great, well-paying jobs, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm bragging, but we're doing very well for ourselves. We've worked hard for everything we have, and we live a really comfortable life that we've built from the ground up. Now, let's talk about my sister-in-law SIL. She still lives at home with my in-laws, who pretty much take care of all her expenses. When I say all, I mean everything from rent to groceries to even her car payments. It's like she never really left the nest, and honestly, it doesn't seem like she's in any rush to. Now, I don't want to sound harsh, but SIL has a bit of a track record of making, let's just say, questionable life choices. She had a daughter, my adorable 4-year-old niece, with her ex-boyfriend, and that relationship ended pretty badly. From what I've gathered, they were on again, off again for a while, and when it finally ended, she moved back in with my in-laws, who were more than happy to support her. That's not all, though. SIL is now gearing up for marriage number 2, and this wedding has been a huge topic of conversation in the family. When she announced she was getting married again, I could see the excitement light up my in-laws' faces. They acted like it was the best news ever, immediately jumping into planning mode, talking about venues, dresses, the guest list, the whole shebang. It felt like they were trying to recreate that magical first wedding vibe, which, honestly, never really happened because she and her ex didn't have a traditional wedding. This time, she's determined to go all out, and it's clear my in-laws are willing to bankroll the entire event just to make sure she gets her dream day. I've been trying to keep things cordial with her, even though there's always been a bit of tension between us. To be fair, we've mostly kept things civil, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a little resentment simmering under the surface. It's hard not to notice the stark contrast between how her life is handled and how Nate's life was. Nate and I are completely self-sufficient. We worked hard, built our careers, and take care of all our own bills. We have a nice apartment, we're saving up for a house, and we're planning for the future all without any handouts. I think sometimes this disparity rubs SIL the wrong way, even if she doesn't say it outright. You can just tell from the way she talks about money, success, and what's fair. So, the bachelorette party, I get this invite to join a small, intimate dinner with her closest friends and family at a really fancy, upscale restaurant in the city. This place isn't your average dinner spot. It's the kind of place where you go for a special occasion, where the waiters wear suits, and the wine list has bottles that cost more than my monthly car payment. I figured it would be a nice night out, and honestly, I wanted to make an effort to show I was happy for her. We might not be best friends, but she's Nate's sister, and that means something. So, I got myself ready, picked out a cute outfit, something chic but not too over the top, since it was her night, and even bought a small, thoughtful gift for her. I picked out a pretty bracelet that I thought would go nicely with her engagement ring. I knew she liked jewelry, and I figured it was a safe bet. When I got to the restaurant, the atmosphere was exactly what I expected: dimly lit, elegant decor, crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, and soft classical music playing in the background. It was one of those places that just oozes luxury, where you can tell every little detail was meticulously planned out to give you a high-end dining experience. The table was set with white linens, polished silverware, and tall candles. It all looked beautiful, and for a moment, I thought to myself, okay, this could actually be a nice night. I was one of the last to arrive, and when I got there, everyone was already sipping on champagne and laughing. SIL was in the middle of telling a story, gesturing animatedly, and she lit up when she saw me walk in. I could tell she was in her element, surrounded by her friends, basking in the attention. I handed her the gift, and she thanked me, giving me a quick hug before placing it on the table beside her. We exchanged the usual small talk, and I took my seat. The evening started off fine. We ordered a round of cocktails, and there were plenty of appetizers being passed around: crab cakes, bruschetta, truffle fries, you name it. The conversation was flowing, and it seemed like everyone was in good spirits. I'll admit, I was starting to relax. Even though I'm not super close with most of the women there, the atmosphere was light, and I was actually enjoying myself. SIL's friends were chatting about wedding plans, gossiping about old acquaintances, and just generally keeping the mood upbeat. I was starting to think, hey, maybe this won't be so awkward after all. We ordered our entrees, and everything looked amazing. I mean, the menu had things like lobster risotto, filet mignon, and duck confit. It was clear that SIL had gone all out to make this a memorable night, and I respected that. It's not every day you get to dine at a place this nice, so I was more than happy to indulge a little. Then, dessert came out. Plates of beautiful little pastries, chocolate lava cakes, and fruit tarts were brought to the table, and they looked almost too pretty to eat. We were all pretty stuffed by this point, but of course, we still managed to find room for dessert. There was laughter, there were toasts to the bride-to-be, and honestly, for a brief moment, I thought, okay, maybe this is a turning point. Maybe things can actually be friendly between us. It was one of those rare times where everything just seemed perfect, and I was glad I had come. But then, just as I was settling into the warm, contented glow of a good meal, the waiter came over. He was holding one of those sleek black leather folders, the kind that all fancy restaurants use to present the bill. Naturally, I assumed he was going to hand it to SIL, since she was the one who organized the whole evening. She was the one who invited us all, after all. But nope. He walks right past her and places it directly in front of me. I remember just staring at this bill, absolutely dumbfounded. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a mistake, like the waiter got the tables mixed up or something. I was sitting there, my mind racing, trying to figure out what was going on, when I heard SIL clear her throat. She leaned forward, with this kind of casual, almost smug expression, and said, "Oh, I forgot to mention my parents and I were talking. And we were thinking you and my brother could handle the bill for this, as a wedding gift, since you're not financially contributing to my wedding." I could feel my jaw drop. I was completely blindsided. In that moment, I couldn't even comprehend the audacity of what she was suggesting. Here we were, at this incredibly expensive restaurant, and she just casually decided that Nate and I would cover the entire bill for 8 people. Without even bothering to ask us beforehand. It wasn't even a question. It was just stated, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't know what to say. I sat there, stunned, staring at the check folder in front of me, trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke, but no one was laughing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stared at her, my mind trying to catch up to the sheer audacity of what she had just said, and honestly, my first thought was that this had to be some kind of joke. Like, Maybe she was trying to be funny, or maybe this was one of those weird, awkward attempts at humor that just didn't land. But nope, there she was, sitting there with that self-satisfied, expectant look on her face, like she had just solved a problem no one else could see. She was dead serious. I managed to stutter out, "And you didn't think to bring this up beforehand?" Because, you know, it's kind of a huge deal to expect someone to just cover a nearly $1,000 bill without a single word of warning. I could feel my cheeks getting hot, and not in a flustered, embarrassed way, more like a slow burn of rage. Who does this? Who plans an entire dinner at an upscale restaurant and then decides, on a whim, that someone else will foot the bill as some kind of gift? I couldn't wrap my head around it. That's when she starts getting defensive, almost like she was surprised I had the nerve to even question her. She crossed her arms, tilted her head slightly, and said, "Well, you guys are doing so well financially, so what's the big deal? I'm sure my brother wouldn't have an issue with it." She said it so casually, as if she was talking about something as minor as splitting an appetizer, not dropping $1,000 on a dinner for 8 people. Her tone was almost condescending, like she was doing me a favor by letting us cover the bill, and I felt my blood start to boil. It wasn't about the money, sure. A $1,000 bill isn't something you just casually cover without blinking, but Nate and I are in a position where we could afford it. That wasn't the issue here. It was the entitlement, the sheer audacity to spring this on me out of nowhere. To assume that I would just quietly nod along and agree to pay because, well, we're well off. It was the way she spoke, as if this was just a formality, like I was supposed to be honored to have this sprung on me at the last minute. So I said, "Why doesn't your fiancé foot the bill? Or, I don't know, maybe your parents, since they're the ones who raised this idea with you." I tried to keep my voice even, but I could hear the sharpness creeping in. I was angry, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Her eyes widened, and she looked at me like I had just said something completely out of line, like I had insulted her on some deep, personal level. It was honestly almost funny how shocked she seemed, as if the thought that someone might push back had never even crossed her mind. She starts going off, her voice rising a bit, saying things like, "You're the wealthiest ones in both my family and my fiance's family, and we didn't think you would act like this." She said it in this tone that made it sound like I was being ridiculous for not just agreeing, as if my resistance was some kind of personal attack on her. She genuinely seemed baffled that I wasn't on board, and the way she phrased it made it clear she had expected this to go down differently. Like, in her mind, I should have been nodding along, pulling out my credit card, and telling the waiter to just charge it all to me with a smile. But that wasn't happening. I could feel the frustration building inside me, and I know I wasn't just going to sit there and let her walk all over me. I said, "Wait a minute, you think because Nate and I make decent money, it's our responsibility to pay for this whole dinner?" Without even being asked beforehand, I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the incredulity in it. I was still trying to give her a chance to realize how absurd this all sounded, to maybe backtrack a bit and admit that, yeah, it was a ridiculous thing to expect of someone, but she didn't. Instead, she doubled down. "It's not about responsibility. It's about what's fair," she said, like she was explaining something simple to a child. "We all know you and Nate are the wealthiest. You have good jobs, you're living comfortably, and it's not like we're asking you to pay for the wedding. This was just supposed to be a nice gesture, a contribution. I didn't think it would be such a big deal." That's when I realized that she genuinely thought she was in the right here. In her mind, this wasn't a huge, presumptuous request, it was just a small, reasonable ask, and I was overreacting for not immediately agreeing. I could feel everyone at the table staring, and there was this awkward silence that followed her little speech, like nobody knew how to react. Some of her friends were looking down at their drinks, trying to avoid eye contact, while others were watching me, clearly waiting to see how I would respond. I took a deep breath, trying to keep myself from snapping, and said, "If this was something you wanted, you should have brought it up with Nate and me beforehand. Springing this on me now, at the end of the meal, is not okay. We came here to celebrate with you, not to be blindsided with the bill. If your parents suggested it, maybe they should have been the ones to talk to us about it." I could feel my hands trembling slightly as I said it, and I wasn't sure if it was from anger or nerves, but I didn't care. I was done playing nice. She just kept staring at me, her expression slowly shifting from confusion to annoyance, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Well, maybe if you and Nate weren't so stingy, you'd actually contribute something to my wedding, instead of just showing up." She said it with this little smirk, like she was trying to provoke me, like she wanted me to lash out so she could play the victim. I could see some of her friends exchanging nervous glances, clearly uncomfortable with where this was going, but nobody said a word. I couldn't believe the nerve of this woman. Here I was, trying to be civil, trying to make a point without causing a scene, and she had the gall to call us stingy, as if we hadn't spent hundreds on gifts, travel, and countless other expenses just to be part of this wedding in the first place. The entitlement was staggering. I could feel my heart pounding, and I had to clench my jaw to keep from saying something I'd regret. I mean, who does she think she is? Implying that we're somehow obligated to fund her lifestyle and her wedding celebrations just because we've been successful. It was infuriating. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to stay calm. I took another breath, trying to steady my voice, and said, "You're right, we are doing well. But that doesn't mean we're obligated to pay for everything just because someone decides we should. That's not how this works, and it's certainly not how you ask for a favor." I could see her bristle at that, and for a moment, I thought she was going to argue back. But she didn't. Instead, she just sat there, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had just ruined her night. I said, "Well, sorry, but I'm not your parents. Don't expect handouts from me." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was beyond caring at that point. I'd been polite. I tried to make my point without causing a scene, and yet here she was, acting like it was my duty to just fork over hundreds of dollars without a second thought. The way she was looking at me, with that smirk and those crossed arms, it was like she thought she had the upper hand, like she expected me to fold and give in because that's what everyone else does around her. But I wasn't playing that game. That's when she completely lost it. I could see her face flush with anger, and she shot back, her voice rising, "Are you serious? You're going to ruin my night over this? I thought you were supposed to be family, and you can't even do one nice thing without making a big deal out of it. God, you're so selfish." She was practically spitting out the words, and I could feel the tension at the table tighten as everyone went dead silent, probably hoping this whole situation would just disappear if they pretended hard enough. But there was no way I was letting her steamroll over me. I just stood up, pushed my chair back, and grabbed my purse. I wasn't going to stand there and let her berate me for not bending over backward to cater to her whims. "Have fun paying for the bill," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though I was absolutely seething inside. I took out my card, handed it to the waiter, and told him to charge my half of the bill. I didn't even bother waiting for a response from SIL. I could feel all eyes on me, but I didn't care. I paid for my share, tucked my card back in my wallet, and without another word, I walked out of that restaurant, leaving behind the stunned silence of the table and, frankly, an explosive mess that I knew was going to have repercussions. The walk to my car was a blur. My heart was still pounding, and I could feel my hands shaking. I was replaying everything that had just happened over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it, trying to calm myself down. Part of me was angry, so angry because I couldn't believe she had the nerve to do that. But another part of me was just tired. Tired of the entitlement, tired of the constant expectation that because we're financially stable, we should be the ones to cover everything without question. It wasn't fair, and I was done pretending it was. When I got home, Nate could tell right away that something was wrong. He asked me how the dinner went, and I could barely hold back the flood of frustration and disbelief as I recounted the entire thing. From the moment the waiter handed me the bill, to SIL's smug assumption that we would just take care of it, to the way she lashed out when I said no. I could see his face change as I told the story, his expression going from curious to shocked to downright furious. I could tell he was trying to stay calm for my sake, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way he clenched his fists slightly as he listened. When I finished, there was this brief, heavy silence. Nate took a deep breath, and then he said, "I can't believe she did that. I knew she could be entitled, but this is a whole new level." He shook his head, clearly struggling to process it all. "You were right to say no. I don't care what she or anyone else says, we're not just a bank account for her to dip into whenever she wants. This is ridiculous. Hearing him say that was such a relief because, honestly, a part of me had been worried that he might try to smooth things over, that he'd suggest I should have just gone along with it to keep the peace. But no, he was just as outraged as I was, and knowing he had my back made me feel a little less alone in all of this. We spent the rest of the night talking it over, going back and forth about how we wanted to handle things. Nate was adamant that I had done the right thing, and he was already considering whether we should even go to the wedding at all. If this is how she's going to treat you, how she's going to try and take advantage of us, then why should we support that, he said. And honestly, I agreed. We've always known that his family tends to favor SIL, but this was a whole new level of entitlement, and I didn't want to set a precedent where she thinks she can just demand whatever she wants from us. But, of course, the fallout was swift and brutal. The very next day, I got a call from my mill, and the moment I heard her voice, I knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. She was fuming, practically yelling into the phone about how I had embarrassed SIL in front of her friends, how I had ruined her special night, and how could I be so heartless as to not contribute to the wedding in such a simple way. She just wanted a nice evening, and you turned it into a disaster, she said, like I was some kind of villain. Apparently, SIL had gone crying to her the moment she got home, spinning the whole thing to make herself look like the victim, and now Mill was rallying behind her, acting like I had committed some unforgivable offense. I tried to explain my side, but it was clear Mill didn't want to hear it. She just kept going on and on, listing off all the ways I had wronged her precious daughter, and I could feel my patience wearing thin. Finally, I cut her off and said, "Look, I'm sorry if she felt embarrassed, but that's not my fault. She had no right to spring that on me at the last minute. If she wanted us to cover the bill, she should have had the decency to ask us beforehand, not ambush me in front of everyone. We are not obligated to pay for everything just because we're doing well, and I'm tired of being treated like a walking checkbook." There was this long, stunned silence on the other end of the line, and then Mill said, in a tone dripping with condescension, "Well, maybe if you were more of a team player, we wouldn't have these problems. You need to apologize to SIL and make this right." I could almost see her shaking her head in disappointment, like I was a child who needed to be scolded into compliance. But I was done. I told her, over my dead body, "I'm not apologizing for standing up for myself, and if you think I'm going to roll over and give in just to keep the peace, then you're in for a surprise." And I hung up. I knew that wasn't going to be the end of it, and sure enough, over the next few days, I started getting messages and calls from other members of Nate's family, cousins, aunts, even a few of his uncles. It was like they were all taking sides, and somehow, I had become the villain in this ridiculous drama. Some of them were supportive, saying they couldn't believe SIL would pull something like that, but others were clearly siding with her, accusing me of being out of line for the comments I made, saying I should just apologize to keep the peace. I couldn't believe it. How was I the one being painted as the bad guy here? I even talked to my own mom about it, hoping for some reassurance, but instead, she surprised me by suggesting that maybe I had taken it a bit too far. "I understand why you were upset, but calling her an entitled brat, maybe that wasn't the best way to handle it. Sometimes it's better to just apologize and move on, you know," she said, her voice gentle, like she was trying to calm me down. I could tell she was coming from a place of wanting to avoid conflict, but I couldn't help but feel frustrated. Why should I be the one to apologize when I wasn't the one in the wrong? So, here I am, caught in the middle of this family drama, with Nate's side pressuring me to apologize, my own mother suggesting I make peace, and me, feeling more stubbornly convinced than ever that I did the right thing by standing up for myself. Every time I think about it, I get angry all over again, and I can't help but wonder, am I really in the wrong here? I could have chosen my words more carefully, sure, but at the same time, I feel like someone needed to say it. So, Reddit, AITA.